On the cutting edge of anomaly research, you are about to experience The Evidence with your host, 3D pioneer and image analyst with Mars X3D, E.W. Gannett.
Well, hi there, and welcome to episode 133 of The Evidence. This is your buddy Dave over at Mars X3D. And today we have a lot of ground to cover. Now, since the demise of Midnight Planets, which used to be a wonderful resource for anybody doing research on Mars, we've been kind of at a loss, or at least some researchers have. I rely mostly on the analyst's notebook and, of course, the NASA JPL Caltech servers. But there is a new resource online called Aerial Browser. And it's a complete examination of all the Mars missions in 2D and 3D, put together by researcher Matt Brealey. So big kudos to you, Matt, for putting together this wonderful resource for us. There is a link included down below in the live links, and I urge you to go check it out if you're at all interested in Mars or even just Mars Anomalies. This is a new place, a new clearinghouse, where you can see everything having to do with Mars. Also, the face, first pointed out by, I believe, Sarah Runcie, has been in the news recently, created a bit of a splash. We're going to take a close look at that in 3D. And also, sorry, but I'm going to pop your bubbles. Yeah. About a classic anomaly that we call the running lady. We'll have a look at that in just a moment. So let's go ahead and dive in and see what we have this week. So, let's get right to it, okay? This is the face that's been making the rounds lately, and as far as I know, Sarah Runcie was the first person to point it out. As we look around in this context view, we see a semicircle of heavily eroded sedimentary mudstone, or it might be sandstone, I don't know, but it looks a lot like the mudstone I grew up seeing in Iowa. At any rate, we see layers of sediment laid down in water, and given the catastrophic history of Mars, this was probably a gargantuan amount of water over a relatively short period of time. You can see our target tucked away in the shadow over on the left. So there you have it, a face showing almost perfect bilateral symmetry, with everything exactly where you'd expect it to be on a face. What exactly are the chances of that? Sarah stated that she felt it was a mummified person, and while I suppose it could be, if it is an actual person's face, it's more likely that it's a mud fossil, which wouldn't be all that surprising since it's surrounded by and buried within hardened mudstone. Others have stated that it must be the remains of a statue. If this is just pareidolia, it's arguably the most perfect example of pareidolia in all the hundreds of thousands of images ever taken by the various Mars missions. Wouldn't it be great to have a decent high-res photo of this thing, or possibly, and I'm making a real stretch here, maybe possibly roll Curiosity a little closer and see what the cameras will tell us. But of course, this is NASA, and for all the genius and creativity of the great intellects who make these missions possible, it's the managed agendas imposed by the upper echelons that keep genuine curiosity in check, both literally and figuratively. I would be inclined to set this aside as a remarkable example of erosion, except for this one small item. See, there's these concentric circles and a nice little knob just to the right that make me think that indeed this just might be the remains of either some statuary or something carved from stone, like the bas-relief carving we find in so many Egyptian temples. Once again, we'll have to leave it right here until we can look at it up close with our own personal eyeballs. Nev's GMAC of 3549 is another treasure trove of strangeness. We'll start out with an oogie, that 4-foot-long chunk of rock inside the box. Those parallel curves have me a bit baffled. I know that it's possible for these to form within a geological context, but then there are those other markings on it as well. I know it's just subjective, but this whole piece looks, purposeful to me. Nevertheless, I'm going to set aside my confirmation bias and call it an oogie, an object of geological interest, if you haven't heard that term before. Besides, there's a lot more to see in this GMAC. Like this intricate block of stone a little further along. Besides all that organized spaghetti on the front, you have that beautiful rectangle and parallel lines on the left corner, as well as more than a few right angles in 3 dimensions. We'll leave this one as an artifact candidate for now and move on. Here's one pointed out by Martine Graney, and she's calling it a wooden crate with 2 iron bands around it. This is a really nice find, but is it actually made of wood, and are those actually iron bands holding it together? Am I being too fussy calling this an artifact candidate instead of a full-blown artifact? Well, take a look at these items found close by. And by the way, if you go to the live link down below, all of these are marked so you can see the originals for yourself. Now, granted, this is much more badly weathered, but still we have what was at one point a cube, and those 2 darker bands going around it, well, they're just part of the geological strata. Or this one, again roughly cubical with, in this case, 3 dark bands going around it. Martine's box is much more pristine, much more a perfect cube. It reminds me of this one I found years ago in the earlier days of curiosity. This hexagonal block has 2 perfect parallel bands running around the middle. We know for a fact that lava flows will form basalt columns that are perfect hexagons. There are examples all over the earth. Problem is, this appears to be sedimentary rock, not igneous. So how come the perfect shape? Here's the point. As a skeptical observer with what I hope is an open mind, as long as there are geologic analogs to be found in the immediate area, I feel that their presence detracts from the uniqueness of any particular find. In other words, Occam's razor is applied once again in the search for the simplest explanation. Nevertheless, this is a beautiful find by Martine, but because of the foregoing, that's why I'm classifying this as an artifact candidate. And before I make Martine irretrievably upset with me, let's take a look at something else she found in 3549. Martine is calling this a metal helmet, and indeed it does appear to be made of metal. We've got those beautiful right angles down below, what appears to be a hinged cheek plate like a Roman helmet, and of course that conical domed top to complete the image of an ancient helmet. Definitely non-fractal. And yes, I definitely consider this to be a full-blown artifact. This is a classic anomaly presented by most of the major researchers in the community from way back in the second year of Curiosity's epic and ongoing journey. Just celebrated 10 years, right? It was just offered up again the other day by Maria Conceição Coelho, the so-called running lady. Maybe you can figure out for yourselves from this context view that the running lady is maybe 4, possibly 5 inches tall. The idea that most people have is that this tiny running lady is dashing towards the rover, her hands raised up in alarm, and the act of her running through the sand, kicking up a cloud of dust behind her. Let's examine that premise. Notice how this block, which by the way is an actual artifact, it's straight as an arrow along its top edge. If this were a dust cloud raised by little feet pounding through the sand, there would be convection currents associated with it. For those of you from Iowa, that means there would be little puffs like you see in a cloud. You know, those big white floaty things up in the sky. The last thing you would see is a dust cloud arranging itself in a straight line. If you take a close look at the heads and the arms, you can see that this is a rock formation lying in the sand some distance behind the block. In a two-dimensional photograph, it only appears to be part of the block in front of it. But like I said a moment ago, the block itself is anomalous. Not only does it have a multitude of right angles in 3 dimensions, it's also uniformly shaped, with that side on the left being perfectly flat. But look at the lower right-hand corner of the block and tell me, what do you see there? Let's take a closer look at that. Once again, we find what reminds me of a ventilation fan, or maybe it's carving. More than likely, it's something entirely different from what we can imagine. Bottom line, this block, along with whatever this little structure is an artifact. But the bottom line on the running lady ain't no such critter. And before we leave this one, here's another one of those Hexblocks sitting off on the horizon. Kind of like this one from Curiosity 962. Some of you may remember this little pyramid from episode 131, one of Rami's finds. This is from a gorgeous 360-degree panorama of the Spirit Bonneville area by Neville Thompson, one of the few he's done, and worth a look if you get around to clicking the live link below. Anyway, I took a quick spin through this one and found a couple other items I wanted to share with you. Yeah, I know. Big deal, Dave. More rocks. But besides the other markings on these rocks, did you notice the perfect isosceles triangle on the lower left? We find a lot of those on Mars. And the square on the upper right. We'll call these oogies for now. And how about this perfect square cut into this one? And here's another classic tombstone shape that myself and others presented years ago. We also find a lot of these as well. Last year I found and presented what I called a hollow isosceles triangle taken at a distance by Persy on its 111th day of exploration. 11 days later, on Sol 122, Persy got a much clearer image of this anomaly, which Rami bar Ilan shared with us just the other day. This is a lot more clear, isn't it? Still not perfect, but Rami is calling this a pyramid. All I know is that it appears to be hollow, it's a perfect rhombus, and it has structures both inside and projecting out of the interior. Very strange and most definitely an artifact. Here are two more similar type objects I found over the last couple of years. We'll wrap things up today with a gorgeous cylinder found again by Rami bar Ilan. You need to click the live link down below and visit his website, where you'll find a huge smorgasbord of anomalies, artwork, and a whole lot more from this talented researcher. So I'm calling it a cylinder and Rami calls it a cone. Which is it? When you look at this fallen pillar I shot during an expedition to Bet Shean in Israel, you can see that perspective gives it the shape of a cone, even though we know it's basically a cylinder. So, which is it? A cylinder or a cone? Well, we can't really know till we get there, can we? Well, we ran a little bit longer than usual today. I hope you don't mind. And I wanted to give a special shout out and a profound thank you for our regular supporters, Proud Weirdos First Class, Kevin Mulligan, Barbara Cloyce, Mike Nelson, Tony DeVerne, Ian, and of course Jimmy Bob and the Cross-Eyed Explorers. Click that join button. You can help support this work. It only costs pennies a day, and sure would appreciate it. And leave a like on your way out, if you don't mind. For all you proud weirdos out there, you know who you are. Stay safe and stay weird. This is your buddy Dave over at Mars X3D. Be well.